Welcome everyone to MIGA's live virtual event on working together to unlock foreign direct investment. We are glad that you can join us today from all parts of the world. My name is Vijay Iyer, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for MIGA. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you. We are all here because we believe that this topic is more critical today than ever before. Today, we know that the COVID-19 pandemic, amongst its other effects, is expected to reduce foreign direct investment by more than 40%. What this means is that there is less capital for developing countries to invest in critical infrastructure, human capital, and climate response. This event will look at these challenges and discuss how we can work better together to unlock FDI. To unpack this challenge and offer solutions, we have an accomplished group of leaders from across the different multilateral development agencies speaking about it today. We encourage you to participate throughout the event. You can do this with the live chat function you see on the right side of your screen. We will also be having a question and answer session towards the end of the event, so I encourage you to post your questions in the chat during the event. On social media, we are using the hashtag Unlock FDI with FDI in caps. Finally, let me also draw your attention to the online poll that will be running through the duration of this event, also on the right side of your screens. Without further ado, I would like to invite Senior Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam from Singapore to deliver his opening remarks. Minister Shanmugaratnam, please.
Let me first congratulate the World Bank Group, and in particular Matano-san and everyone at MIGA, for the very good work that's gone into this important handbook. And I congratulate too MIGA and all its partners for the way in which you're modeling the type of partnerships that we need for a much more challenging future. We knew before the pandemic that the scale of development finance we were going to need for the developing and emerging world was going to be much larger than what we had seen in recent decades. We knew that. What COVID-19 has done is to accentuate the gaps in development finance. Revenues are down almost everywhere in the world, and available revenues are having to be channeled into the immediate and pressing needs of the crisis, public health needs, and mitigating the loss of jobs. What we have to do now, as we look forward and as we come out of COVID, is to avoid a rollback of the very important gains in development that were made in recent decades. Avoid getting onto a lower trajectory of growth as we come out of COVID, which will affect not just the developing world, but also countries everywhere. And the consequences of a low trajectory of growth will be not merely economic. It requires a forceful effort to rebuild growth, but it also requires innovative solutions. Whichever way we look at it, we're going to need more development finance from domestic sources, from international sources, from public sources, from private sources. But private sources are going to be critical. We are going to need significantly greater private funding for development than we have seen in past decades. And it means we have to run the system differently to incentivize private capital and to allow for returns that are based on lower risks than has been perceived in the past. It can be done. We can, in particular, when it comes to political risk insurance, find ways in which we pool together risks from different projects, different countries, different regions into globally diversified portfolios, and to do it on scale. That is a prerequisite for attracting a substantially greater volume of private finance, including in particular that large amount of institutional investor finance that is waiting by the sidelines. MIGA's initiatives to develop these new partnerships in the last couple of years have been fruitful, and we have to take them further now. And this handbook, which sets out the principles and modalities for bringing these partnerships into concrete reality, is important. We can and must succeed in the next few years in particular, because the next few years will shape outcomes for the next decade and beyond. It will allow us to build back better. We cannot afford to fail. Thank you.
Thank you, Senior Minister, for your insightful comments. G20 Eminent Persons Group, led by you, was a forum at which the call was made for greater coordination between multilateral development banks on political risk insurance. Indeed, today's event is the outcome of that call, and I thank you for your insight and the path that you have charted out for all of us. I'm delighted that we have such a strong turnout for our event, and particularly grateful for the representatives from the international finance institutions that are participating. Let me share a few thoughts on where MIGA stands now and what the horizon looks for our vantage point. As is the case for many of you, the pandemic has taken up much of our work program this calendar year. In early April, we launched a $6.5 billion fast-track facility to help investors and lenders tackle COVID-19. And as of September, MIGA has issued $2.6 billion in guarantees for projects to mitigate the impact of the crisis in emerging markets and developing economies. Some of the effort we supported included providing liquidity for banks across multiple countries in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as Eastern Europe, and tapping into international credit markets to secure loans at a favorable rate for Colombia's Bank Codex program, which provides financing for micro, small, and medium enterprises. Our support for the global pandemic response will continue to be an integral part of what we do for the duration of the pandemic and long after that, as the world continues to grapple with COVID-19's long-term effect. At the same time, we have an ambitious work program over the coming 3 years that aims to deliver real development impact on the ground. Put simply, our job is to encourage private investors to stay the course and to offer them great stability by helping manage and mitigate country risk. Our 3-year strategy covers fiscal years 2021 to 23 and envisages an average of $5.5 to $6 billion in insurance per year. It also sees an increase in portion of guarantees going to low-income countries and fragile and conflict-affected situations to about 33%, and calls for an annual average climate finance-related insurance of 35%. Against a long-term trend of declining FDI, developing countries, and pandemic, there are ambitious targets that we require us to expand the way in which we deploy our firepower. We are focused on developing innovative products and applications, some which will be discussed today to meet these goals. Deepening our partnership with other MDBs is also an essential part of how we get there. MIGA has a strong history of working with sister agencies across all regions to deploy political risk insurance in support of offering comprehensive financing solutions for projects. Some of these include liquidity facilities, reinsurance, first loss guarantees, replicable deal structures, and even sector reforms. I'm only scratching the surface here, and I look forward to learning more over the coming hour. The participants in this event are seasoned professionals, and I'm sure will share deep and practical insights. Again, I'm thankful for the multiple agency representatives participating in this event, and look forward to bringing to the table all tools at our disposal so that we can together meet the challenge of the day, and also make the most of the tremendous opportunity that lie ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senior Minister Shanmugaratnam and Hiroshi Matano, for those words. I would like to now invite you to watch a short video which features the key principles for partnerships that we are talking about today.
Until 5 years ago, developing countries had been attracting a steady flow of much-needed foreign investment. But in 2015, the lure of high returns in mature economies caused the tide to turn. Now, COVID-19 threatens to make private capital even scarcer in the cash-strapped nations that need it most. The financing gap is wide. Achieving goals for sustainable development alone will require annual investments of $3.9 trillion over the next 10 years. But today's investment levels leave a shortfall of $2.5 trillion a year. Worse yet, FDI into low-income and fragile countries has been in decline since 2015, when it hit $93 billion, plummeting to a 6-year low of $52 billion in 2018. Now, more than ever, private capital is crucial to filling the gap. But only 37 cents of additional capital is mobilized for every dollar of public investment. To attract that capital, international financial institutions must collaborate more closely, particularly when it comes to investment guarantees and credit enhancement for borrowers. Following extensive consultations, MIGA is proposing a new approach to increase collaboration. We propose a shift from ad hoc, opportunistic partnerships to systematic collaboration. From pursuing the same transactions and project pipelines to cooperation, from inefficient engagement with duplication of documents and processes to streamlined and consistent interaction on joint projects. 10 guiding principles will help us get there. Complementarity, harnessing our complementary capabilities to do difficult projects. Systematic collaboration, approaching our partnerships systematically and intentionally. Innovation, advancing new instruments and product applications. Project subsidiarity, working with the best positioned institution to streamline due diligence. Reliance, relying on each other's due diligence work where possible. Accountability, holding ourselves accountable for verifying information received. Comparability, aligning policies and standards for project evaluation. Scalability, scaling and repeating successful partnership formats. Recognition, developing incentives for institutions to work with each other. Results, measuring results of collaborative projects. Guided by these principles, we believe that international organizations could replicate and scale projects like a tropical fruit processing project in Sierra Leone, where MIGA combined a first loss guarantee with traditional political risk coverage from NEXI, Japan's export credit agency, a toll bridge project led by the African Development Bank in Côte d'Ivoire, where MIGA ensured equity investment and loans by Bouygues and Pan-African Infrastructure Development Fund, a power project in Myanmar, where IFC, ADB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and a group of commercial lenders provided the financing and MIGA insured against political risk, a solar project in Egypt, where IFC and EBRD led 59 private investors, backed by MIGA Insurance, to build 25 megawatts of new energy generation. Political risk insurance is a key catalyst for mobilizing investment in worthy, impactful development projects. Between 2013 and 2017, annual private investment in emerging markets averaged $56 billion. Almost 40% of that sum was covered by political risk insurance. At a time like this, working in concert is essential, and ramping up the role of investment guarantees and credit enhancements is a core part of that collaboration. We have a plan. We're stronger together. Let's work to unlock FDI to developing countries.
Now it is time for our feature discussion. We are lucky to have an accomplished group of speakers from across the world today. And to lead it all, I'm going to invite Ethiopis Tafara, Vice President, MIGA, and the Chief Risk, Legal, and Administrative Officer for MIGA to lead the discussion. Ethiopis, please take it away.
So thank you, Vijay, and hello, and thank you to everybody who's joined us today for this discussion. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Ethiopis Tafara, and I'm the Vice President and Chief Risk, Legal, and Administrative Officer at MIGA. Before we get started, I thought it might be useful for me to talk a little bit about the genesis of the handbook. About a year ago, I joined MIGA, and one of the first things I was asked to do by the then CEO was to chair an MDB conference, one that we look to hold every 2 years. The theme of that conference was cooperation and collaboration among MDBs to de-risk projects, particularly looking at political risk insurance coverage that might be provided by MIGA. And during the course of the conversation, although the public rhetoric around cooperation and collaboration is always positive, behind closed doors, it was clear that there were a couple of sets of concerns that MDBs had. The first set of concerns was around what it meant to cooperate when we're talking about people's pipelines. There was a fear that, in essence, collaboration or cooperation would amount to nothing other than opening up your pipeline and giving pieces of that pipeline to other MDBs. And many said, to the extent I didn't need you to begin with to get that pipeline built, why would I give pieces of it away? And so that was a very strong concern expressed by almost every MDB in the room. The other set of concerns was around the challenges of working with one another in terms of the friction that is present in trying to get things done when you're multiplying effort and duplicating effort and having to go through different approval processes across the MDBs. Many said, at the end of the day, sometimes the participation of other MDBs in the project actually slows things down to the point that we wonder whether it's worth it. So we thought it would be very useful for us to sit down and think through solutions to both those issues. First, it became clear that what we really needed was to grow the pie and build pipelines of projects that don't happen unless we come together. So not the projects you already have in your pipeline, but something that you're not doing and may not be able to do unless you bring in others and you collaborate with others. And we came up with a set of typologies based on experience of projects that don't happen except when we come together as a collective. And the other thing we did was to think through how might we work with others in such a way that we don't slow things down and we don't complicate things. Are there ways in which we can actually rely on the work that's done by others rather than duplicate the effort? Is there a way to think about approval processes so that we don't slow down projects? So the handbook is in essence an exercise whereby we try to figure out how to solve these two issues, clear issues in the minds of MDBs that serve to hinder collaboration. And we had a lot of input and a lot of support from many. The panelists here today were very much a part of that effort, and we thank them and their institutions for the guidance and advice they provided us as we're putting this handbook together. And today we'll have an opportunity to talk about some of the principles in the handbook and some of the typologies with the help of these colleagues who've joined us. And so with that, why don't I introduce the panel for today. I have with me Mr. Fabio Fagundes, who is the Chief of Financial Products and Services at IDB Invest. I'm also joined by Ms. Nandita Parshad, who is the Managing Director of the Sustainable Infrastructure Group at EBRD. And I'm joined also by Solomon Quaynor, who's the Vice President for Private Sector, Infrastructure, and Industrialization at the African Development Bank. For the discussion today, we're going to focus just on three principles, those being the principles of complementarity, of innovation, and reliance. And we'll also discuss some real-life examples of projects where we've applied these principles and by virtue of that have been able to deliver impact on the ground. And the first principle is the principle of complementarity, which is about combining our complementary capabilities, our complementary products to de-risk complex projects. And the recent project that exemplifies this principle is the Sierra Tropical Fruit Processing Facility in Sierra Leone, where MIGA and NEXI both provided coverage. The problem was the following. It had a Japanese investor, Itochu, that was going into a new challenging business environment and wanted and needed some robust political risk insurance coverage to give it a sense of comfort. But Itochu was extremely price sensitive. The solution was for MIGA to provide expropriation and breach of contract cover, while NEXI provided war and civil disturbance cover. And NEXI also reinsured 50% of MIGA's exposure. And finally, we had IDA's private sector window provide a first loss layer. This combination of products allowed us to collectively de-risk the transaction while importantly providing optimal pricing. Now, there's a strong record of successful joint MDB projects, but they tend to happen on an ad hoc basis. And if MDBs intentionally coordinate upstream and understand each other's products better, then projects could be structured more efficiently to ensure optimal risk allocation. So the question for you, Solomon, is how can MDBs leverage their complementary strengths in a more systematic fashion to de-risk transactions, particularly given our collective focus in IDA and FCS countries?
Thank you very much, Ethiopius. I think the key answer is really about proactivity. Today, it's no longer just nice to collaborate. It's become urgent to collaborate because with really the COVID disruption and the recovery, size and immenseness, we're going to really have to work together proactively a lot earlier. And it's important that we go beyond the MOUs and we actually focus really on operationalizing the intent. And this is where we need to have point people at our respective institutions. We need to empower them, support them. I remember IFC did this with MIGA, with Ilona Cripper. That's the sort of thing we need to put in place so that we have pipeline conversations, in real time. We clearly understand each other's, products and how complementary they are. And we look to actually deploy, to deploy them as we approach clients to actually present, a holistic solution and not just part of, of the solution. And so, if I were to just, focus really on where the emphasis is, it's going to be proactivity, operationalizing it, and really having periodic conversations at the operational level, and then also really at the high level as well.
I realize that obviously you've been giving a lot of thought to cooperation and collaboration at the AFDB, and I believe you have a co-guarantee platform that you've put in place for the very purpose of bringing MDBs together. Can you describe it a little bit and let us know how it works and what it is you think will be accomplished by virtue of this platform?
No, so Ethiopius, thank you very much for the opportunity to share this, and we actually look forward to having MIGA and also EBRD in the context of Africa. Flavio, I know you don't cover Africa, but we look forward to really having both your institutions, join the co-guarantee platform. I think this is one of the ways in which we've actually put complementarity of products, to work. Because not all of us, deliver the same types of products. So if you take a look at some of the projects we're looking at, the AFDB would provide, a PRG for liquidity support. And then you have, the African, trade insurance, company being the one that provides PRI. But, clearly the capacity of each of these institutions to deliver on the transformational projects that, we think would be good examples. And if you realize I didn't say large scale, because transformative in FCS countries don't necessarily have to be large scale, but they will be relatively large. I think this is really one of the ways in which we can bring our products together, we can risk share, and there are already about 4 institutions involved. We do plan to set up a secretariat, but we would really love to have, both your institutions join and also provide leadership in the areas where your products and product innovation, definitely give you a comparative advantage.
Thank you, Solomon. A firm believer in always of harnessing the power of partnership. So look forward to engaging with you. And I think I speak for my colleagues in saying this, engaging with you to see how it is we can join forces and through the platform, deliver more on the ground, particularly in Africa.
I am very proud of the work that Egypt has done with its development partners, the work that multilateral development banks have provided in collaboration with the government of Egypt before 2020, during 2020, as we write a future that is inclusive and sustainable for everyone.
The next principle I'd like to discuss is the one of innovation, where we work together to advance innovative products and solutions. And the project I want to cite to show this principle in action is the Elazığ Hospital project in Turkey. This is a project that both Nandita and I know well and for which we have great appreciation. In this project, the project itself needed access to capital markets, but institutional investors require a minimum investment grade rating in order to be able to allocate capital. And the challenge was that with the combination of the sovereign risks and the project risks, the overall project rating was below investment grade. The solution that we came up with is one whereby EBRD and MIGA came together to develop a joint risk mitigation scheme that combined, on the one hand, EBRD's credit enhancement facility for interim liquidity and MIGA's political risk insurance to ensure a lump sum payment in the event of termination. Now, COVID has accentuated many of the challenges that we were already facing. We have a regression of people into extreme poverty in vast numbers, increasing gap in terms of gender inequality, and the situation is creating even more difficulty for access to education and increasing the disparity in prosperity. So the question for you, Nandita, is how important a factor will innovation be in addressing these challenges, and will partnership among MDBs help increase or improve innovation?
Thank you so much, Ethiopius, and thank you for mentioning our favorite project. I can't agree more. The COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated the challenges that we were already facing in many of our countries. But it's also created new ones, right? Around stimulating economic recovery, heightened awareness of the urgency to manage the other looming risk, climate change. Many governments were already unable to address these pre-existing challenges adequately, but now they're overstretched even more so with the ongoing health crisis. And they lack both the resources and the capacity to implement the scale of investment needed to meet these challenges. So it's an absolute need now, I think, more than ever before, that we have to mobilize the private sector. It's only the private sector stepping up to meet the gaps left behind that will get us there. But I actually think there's good news here, because there is no shortage of capital. And if anything, the pandemic has also raised awareness in the global financial community of the need to support investments that are socially and environmentally sound and in line with the SDG agenda. I mean, you now hear institutional investors from all over the world talking about SDGs, something you never heard even a year ago. But of course, there still remains this wide chasm between this huge volume of capital out there and the needs in our countries. And the perceptions of high political risk and the shortage of bankable projects continue to dog the situation. So really, my answer to your question is innovation is not just important, but it's going to be absolutely essential if we are to bridge this chasm, if we are to find ways to mitigate those risks, create bankable projects, and attract that capital that's just sitting out there into our countries and for our needs. And to the second part of your question about partnerships, I mean, I think partnerships are essential. I think Solomon highlighted this in his opening words, the collaboration, the cooperation, the operationalization of this partnership. It's absolutely essential also for innovation. I always love to talk about one of our favorite projects, and I think one that at least three of us on this screen can be proud of, which was the groundbreaking project. The groundbreaking project that we all did in Egypt, the Benban 1.8 gigawatt solar park. Now that was a project that was all about partnership. This was about MDBs partnering with each other, but also partnering with the authorities, partnering with the private sector, finding innovative ways around some rather challenging issues on bankable structures. And with that collaboration, we made this enormous project happen. And it's exactly that kind of partnership that we need to bring to innovation and to scaling up impact. And maybe I'll just add to what Solomon already said about the need for operationalizing and formalizing cooperation. It's also important not just to share pipelines, but to share our upstream work. And this is something we've actually started with you, Ethiopius, at MIGA, where we've realized that it's not enough that we show you what projects are coming, But when we're working upstream, designing renewable options in countries, preparing PPPs, that's the time we have to start the collaboration. That's the time we need to be saying, you know, what kind of innovative structures can we already share in the documentation upstream? And this is really something, particularly with you at MIGA, we really want to start bringing in very, very early on. So when investors see these projects coming, they can see the risk mitigation already there. So, and I'll leave it at that.
There is the need to expand both in sectors and in countries. In sectors, a lot has been done in energy production, but we can do more and replicate the same actually in transmission lines, in transportation, in water, social infrastructure, waste, and in countries outside of the usual 10-15 countries. I'm sure we can try to replicate this in other countries. So once we'll be able to expand these partnerships with MDBs, with the private sector and the public authorities, we'll collectively, I think, have a deeper and larger impact on the SDGs on the continent, and I believe that's our goal altogether. Thank you.
The final principle I'd like to discuss is the principle of reliance. I know it's a principle that sometimes find a bit unsettling, but where we feel MDBs should rely on each other's due diligence to the greatest extent possible. Now, to show this principle in action, I'm going to cite to the Henri Conan-Bédy toll bridge in Côte d'Ivoire, in which we were involved some years back. And although it was some years back, MIGA and AFDB's coordination in that project left some lasting lessons for us. At the time, the country was just coming out of a civil war, and the information that was available to MIGA from the client was outdated. Most of it had been collected before the war, and it did not give us a good sense of the risks involved. Fortunately, AFDB was the lead arranger and much closer to the project. They were in a better position to obtain more updated due diligence reports, and so MIGA reached out and relied on AFDB to get the job done. Now, this approach was very effective. It was cheaper, it was faster, it was more reliable than trying to reinvent the wheel, especially in a very fragile environment. Many MDBs share similar development mandates and have substantially aligned policies, which would allow us to make progress on relying on each other's due diligence. And at the same time, each institution still has to make its own decisions and remain accountable to its authorizing environment. So the question for you, Fabio, is how do we improve our ability to rely on work from other institutions while at the same time managing internal constraints? Do you have an example of a project where MDBs relied successfully on each other? And if so, if you could share that with us.
Thank you, Georges. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting IDB Invest to participate in this panel. This crisis has heavily impacted our clients in the private sector of the 26 countries who operate in Latin America and the Caribbean. Beyond the traditional definition of fragility, countries in our region are mostly middle income, but they are also heavily urbanized with densely populated areas. And they have suffered disproportionately with the collapse of mass transport systems and infrastructure. The tourism sector, the backbone of several economies in the Caribbean, and the small islands and states in the Pacific, not only in our region. And you're absolutely right. The way forward and I will mention what Nandita said about bankable assets. The needs are there. The regions that we manage and we develop are in need of the financing that we can provide them with. Now, when we look about how can we be more productive and have more bankable assets to mobilize more the trillions of assets under management that is out there, our cooperation and based on reliance, and as you said it's right, it's the more we do together, the more we will be able to rely on each other, trusting on our systems. Of course, when you think about first alignment of interests, we are very much aligned on our goals, on our development impact. And this is very clear when, for example, we have projects in infrastructure where the needs exceed the capabilities of each other, of each individual multilateral or DFI. And therefore, that alignment pushes us to work together in an effective manner. We also need to recognize that the different MDBs and DFIs, they have different strengths, as you quoted in your example. So some MDBs will be very strong in local markets with very robust due diligence and structuring abilities. And we need to leverage on those linkages with the public sector. And we have done a couple of good examples with Renova in Argentina, Klabin and LG Celuloses in Brazil, with partnering with your sister company, IFC. Again, one important aspect of the reliance, and going back to Nandita's point on mobilization of assets under management across the globe, is how much bankable assets we can produce. So productivity is key for our teams, and cost related to those projects that we are putting in place, it's key for our clients. So the all-in cost, if we can maximize, and there's another good example of a transaction where together we retained the same law firm to support the structure that we are putting together to a client in Central America. And those are, when you consider the bankable projects, the de-risking that you can promote, and the reduction of overall all-in costs for the clients, leverage on each other's due diligence, as you detailed in the beginning, that's when we will increase our productivity and also our financial sustainability, that will improve the return to taxpayers' money, retained earnings that will generate more capital for the future of our institutions to do more of those projects. So I would summarize my answer stating that reliance on the effective finding of our teams will promote more bankable assets, more productivity, and allow us to be more cost competitive, and finally be able to attract more, have more bankable assets to attract international local investors to further deploy capital to our regions in need. Thank you.
We are sure that a greater coordination among these international organizations will increase their ability to deliver on their developing mandates. A better alignment among their taxonomies, metrics, contracts, a further focus on the risking projects will help to crowd in stakeholders' efforts, particularly those coming from the private sector, which are crucial to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. This fully resonates with Santander's purpose to help people and businesses prosper.
The benefits of MDBs utilizing PRI are numerous, including the protection against losses and bad debt, providing a solution to limit constraints, enhancing access to new markets, and as well allowing for better financing terms. Through risk sharing with the beneficiary of the guarantee or the insurance, MDBs can mobilize substantial amount of capital, helping to enhance their developmental impact.
So while time doesn't permit us to discuss every one of them, there is one principle that I think deserves an honorable mention, and that is the principle of recognition. You know, we all know our staff are really the engine that keeps the whole system going. So to successfully implement this culture of systematic collaboration, I think all of our institutions need to make sure that we're putting in place adequate incentives for staff and for management. And recognition, as simple as it sounds, is a very powerful incentive to actually promote the collaboration we think necessary for us to undertake these projects that don't happen unless we come together to de-risk them. So now let me turn to some of the questions we've received from the audience through the chat. We'll answer as many as we can in the time that we have. And I'll start with you, Nandita, with the first question, which is, how can working more systematically help MDBs work better on emerging issues and crises such as COVID-19?
Thank you, Etheopius. And I think to some extent, my fellow panelists have already answered this question. But, you know, COVID-19 was a crisis that caught us all quite unprepared. But we'll surely learn lessons from this. And we at EBRD actually just adopted our new strategy for the next 5 years in the middle of this crisis. And not surprisingly, the 3 headlines of our new strategy are green, equal, and digital. Because these are the lessons we've also learned from COVID, and this is where we will need to focus into the future. And I believe these messages will resonate across the entire MDB community as areas where we're going to need to work collectively to deliver in all of our countries. As we've already discussed, dialogue, communication, coordination between MDBs is essential to deliver in a crisis, but also beyond. And I must say, we've actually done very well throughout this crisis by collaborating very effectively. We saw all of our networks activate rapidly and strongly in the early days of COVID, both at senior levels, but most importantly, operationally on the ground in countries. We saw heads of agencies coming together, making sure we were speaking with one voice to the governments, and making sure that we were in fact adhering to the principles we just heard about of complementarity and reliance in our delivery. But I'd also perhaps mention one other, and I think you referred to it as well, Ethiopia's principle 2, I think, of your handbook, which is the systematic collaboration. And I think this I would take away from this panel as being something we really need to be more focused on, because fighting a crisis like COVID-19 or climate change is a huge task, and neither can be addressed without cooperation, alignment, and systematic collaboration between MDBs.
Thank you, Nandita. I think the next question actually is the other side of the coin. So, you know, we know what the aspiration is, and Nandita has highlighted some of what we're aspiring to accomplish together. But the question is, what are the challenges to getting MDBs to work more effectively with each other? And this question is for you, Fabio. Can you give us a sense of what you see as being the challenges for more effective collaboration among MDBs?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ethiopius. What we have been able to achieve, and it's a very good example of how to cope and to solve those challenges in terms of putting and incentivizing our teams to work together in many of the projects that we are originating, structuring. And when we look through the entire process of from origination to disbursement to mobilizing partners, one excellent example that we have been able to achieve was with the European DFIs, the Friendship Alliance that they have, in which we put in place co-financing agreements that allowed us to incentivize our teams to work together, to become more agile, to structure bankable assets in a way that we can distribute to the market. And these types of co-financing agreement is potentially the solution to promote and to incentivize our teams to take on the challenge of working together.
Thank you, Fabio. So I think we have time for one more question, and we'll direct this to you, Solomon, and I think appropriate. You know, a lot of attention is being given to making a difference in FCS and IDA countries. You know, that's pretty much the frontier where we need to be present to make a difference. And of course, there are a significant number of fragile and IDA countries in Africa within the AFDB constituency. So the question is, what are MDBs doing to de-risk investments in fragile settings? And And how can more engaged collaboration help specifically in countries that investors perceive as being high risk?
I agree with Nandita that we need to work more upstream, especially in FCS markets, because this is where we have to actually create projects. We have to either do joint project development, or we have to do a whole lot more upstream work. So this is going to be very important in, we call it ADF countries, you call it FCS and IDA. And part of the reason that, even though the size of the transactions may not be as big, the risk of the transactions, not just really from a market or operational risk, but really from a fragility risk, is so high. All of us are more worried about, protecting the downside than necessarily capturing the upside. So this is really why we need to, collaborate a whole lot more upstream. We need to bring together our various instruments. We need to also look at, how we can, blend, bring blended products, together as well. And my sense is that, that upstream collaboration, the complementarity of instruments, and this is where we can have PRGs and PRIs, combined, because we're looking at things from a risk mitigation, holistic perspective, not just really from a deployment of products. This is how I think we could actually address that.
So unfortunately, we're running out of time. And so I would now like to thank Fabio, Nandita, and Solomon for joining us today on this panel, for sharing their insights, but more importantly, for being partners in putting this handbook together and being partners in addressing development challenges through projects we undertake in collaboration with each other. Now, while we showcase just 3 of the principles, I really would encourage everyone to check out the handbook for a fuller discussion of all the principles and for examples of the principles in action, as well as a description of projects that are really meaningful in terms of their impact, that don't happen unless we come together as a collective to de-risk them. I look forward to finding more partners, and I expect that in this audience, there are a number of partners current where we want to deepen the partnership, but maybe some new partners with whom we can work to address the challenges of development. With that, thank everybody for joining the discussion. And next, I'd like to introduce Mari Pangestu, the World Bank Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnerships, who's going to provide some closing remarks. Thank you, everybody.
Greetings from Washington, D.C. It is my pleasure to be here with you at this virtual event. Thank you to my esteemed colleagues for laying the foundation and providing a roadmap for how to engage in systematic partnership by leveraging investment guarantees. These guarantees are a powerful tool to catalyze foreign direct investment to developing countries. This conversation comes at a time when the COVID-19 pandemic is taking a drastic human and economic toll. Poverty is rising for the first time in more than 20 years, and about 150 million more people will be pushed into extreme poverty by 2021. To stem the tide of these impacts, the World Bank Group is making available up to $160 billion in financing and has delivered emergency health support to over 100 countries so far. Our efforts and our reach have been strengthened through our partnerships, and these partnerships have been critical to the global response. We are partnering for the delivery of vaccines, working with other MDBs, bilateral partners, UN agencies, CEPI, and Gavi, and we are ensuring that developing countries aren't left behind and are supported in terms of vaccine purchases and delivery, as well as diagnostics and therapeutics to treat COVID-19. We are partnering for COVID-19 financing, where we have been encouraging other MDBs and bilateral partners to co-finance operations so projects can expand quickly. To date, our partner institutions are already contributing between $70 to $80 billion to complement our existing $160 billion. And as I understand it, The Elazığ Hospital in Turkey, that was supported by MIGA and EBRD and mentioned in the panel discussion, is playing a key role in Turkey's pandemic response. The hospital opened just months before the pandemic began and was used exclusively to handle the first wave of COVID-19 cases because of its modern ICU facilities. While these are only a few examples of partnerships we are engaged in, they illustrate the potential effectiveness of partnerships, working across the MDBs to also bring in the private sector investors is an avenue we absolutely must strengthen. The discussions about unlocking foreign direct investment today leave me energized on the potential for further deepening our work together to catalyze private investment for developing countries. Working off the complementary strengths of each institution, we can further promote FDI and promote and foster more resilient recovery. With that, I encourage all of you to think about concrete next steps to ensure that we are working more effectively in partnership with one another. This is an opportunity, but equally important, a challenge and an imperative that we must rise to. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie, for those inspiring words. At the beginning of the event today, we spoke about where we are. I would like to close the event by asking each of us what we can do tomorrow in order to truly make big strides for development. The event showed us that partnership is important, but effective partnership is critical. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's move forward together and see how we can apply these principles in our daily work. Thank you for joining us today. And remember to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to learn more on how we are working with our partners to unlock FDI for development. Good day, everyone.